Okay, so let's move on to our second topic. Now, Shereen Malherbe is a British Palestinian writer. She's an English literature graduate. Her first book, Jasmine Falling, has been voted in the top 20 best books for Muslim women, by Muslim women. Her second novel, The Tower, was published by Beacon's Book in April 2019. And her latest book, which we'll learn more about, titled The Land Beneath the Light, which is out very soon. She studied the representation of Muslim women in the media, and I'm really pleased to say she's joining us live now from Leicester. Welcome to the program, Shereen. Assalamu alaikum. It's great to have you on.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Let's start on, how are you and your family coping during these last 18 months or so during this pandemic?
Well, I think it's teaching everybody patience and to be more grateful. We have 4 children at home, so I was also a teacher, so that was fun.
Yeah, so you're sort of multitasking between being a novelist and also doing the teaching.
Yes, exactly.
Which takes a lot of patience, if I can recall from my time with my children, my 4 daughters who were at home during this pandemic. Very busy household, very little silence in the house.
Yes, that's very true. I was asked recently, actually, how I even managed to write with 4 children. But they're one of the reasons that I do write. So it makes it that little bit easier. I think you have to be really passionate about what you do, and then you have to dedicate some time to it and carve it out. And that's the only way really it works. And most of the time I write furiously because I'm very passionate about things. Yeah. And I think that's the drive that gets me through, actually.
Yeah. And then when you write, do you write pretty much solid for a month to get the book done, or do you do bits and bats as when you can fit it in?
It's a really good question, actually, about technique. I work on the first draft over a matter of weeks until it's finished, building up to a word count of about 60,000 words to 80,000, and then take a break for a couple of months and then go back to it and start all over again.
Yeah, and we've got lots of questions coming through for you because lots of people knew you were coming. So lots of aspiring writers who want to learn more about the book. We'll go through some of those questions in the second part of the program. Let's just talk about your upbringing. Where were you born? What was your childhood like? Tell us a bit about that.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in the UK, and I didn't actually know a great deal about Palestine as I was growing up, and that journey really began when I was in my 20s. So very much born and raised in the UK, went to school here, and really only started to discover my Palestinian heritage after I left my banking career in my early 20s. My husband and I went traveling around the Middle East and stayed with my family in Palestine. And that was really the first sort of journey to discover that side of my heritage. So pretty, I'd say, good upbringing, and I've always written. I always enjoyed school and was very academic, but I didn't really think you could make a career from writing. So I went into banking and...
as you do.
Yes. And I did enjoy it. I went from sort of a small farming branch to strategy in Canary Wharf, and just decided that it wasn't really for me. So when my husband and I got married, we decided to go traveling, and that's when I sort of embarked on my personal journey to say I'm going to become a writer, and that's when it all changed.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. As I said, we've got lots of questions coming through on the text as well. So if you want to share your questions with Shereen, 01924231083 lines are open now. WhatsApp number is there on the screen as well, so please do get in touch. And if you're watching this on Facebook Live or across various social media platforms, please just post your comment or your question. I promise we'll get through some of them very, very shortly. Just very quickly, we've got a quick break to get to Shereen. What did you learn about yourself when you were growing up, when you look back at that period of your life?
I think naturally you know where your talent lies, and I think sometimes the pull for a career, especially with school, can be sort of the deciding factor about what you get into. But looking back, as always with hindsight, I felt that I couldn't make the career I wanted from writing. But looking back, I'd say, use the talents that you've got, because if you do something that you love, you're more likely to be successful at it. So my big learning curve was to pick writing back up. And after a long break, it took a bit longer than I expected, actually.
Yeah. Well, what we're going to do, we're going to take a very quick break. It's fascinating. I love listening to stories about people's upbringings and sort of the reflection. And it usually, Shereen, throws people when I ask that question. What did you learn about yourself as you were growing up, looking back? So you've done really well. Maybe that sort of writing, being a writer kind of helped with you with that. We'll take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll continue the very important conversation. As I said, we'll get through some of your questions and your comments. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. My special guest is Shereen Malherbe, the British Palestinian author and novelist. Just reflecting before the break about her upbringing and childhood. And just tell us, where did that interest come in terms of wanting to be a writer?
I did actually write when I was at school. I remember actually appearing in papers for my poetry competitions. I was only reminded actually when it was pulled out of the loft recently. And surprisingly, the subjects were quite similar, so that's interesting. And at 13, I was actually offered a contract with Penguin Publishers for an anthology. But at 13, I needed 15 poems. And at the time, I just felt like it was too much. So I actually didn't go ahead with it. So it's always been something that I've loved and always done. But I think it comes to that time when you're leaving college where you're thinking, what's next? And yes, it just became a pull, I suppose, between a career in finance or writing. And I'd always really seen writing as something that I did because I really loved it, as opposed to something that I wanted to base my career around.
Yeah. And then are writers generally people who love to read as well, read other books?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, my mum said when I was growing up that she often found me in my bedroom reading books, and she actually said to one of her friends, "Is this normal? I mean, Shereen's in her room all the time reading books." And
it kind of makes a change, doesn't it, from kids nowadays who sit in their rooms on their computer games and their smartphones.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what my mum's friend actually said. She said, well, if she was on a computer, you wouldn't mind. So, yeah, I think it is just natural that if you read a lot, I don't think it can happen the other way around. I don't think you can write without reading. And I think your interest in books has to be a real passion, because they're very long projects, and the end result of a novel isn't always what you'd expect. So it has to be another driver. There has to be something else behind your writing that pushes you to want to create. And if you have that and you discover what that is for yourself as an individual, then I think that really is the key to success. There's a very classic book translated from Arabic, Don't Be Sad. I'm sure you and some of the listeners have heard of it. And it has an analogy about a tree. For an olive tree, you plant yourself in soil that's suitable for an olive tree. A lemon tree wouldn't survive in the same environment. An orange tree wouldn't. And it was an analogy for what your soul sort of inclines to do. And I thought that was really poignant, because I think all of us have something unique about us, talents, whether it's art, calligraphy, writing, journalism, reporting, being a doctor. And I think if we discover what that is and we actually go with what we're inclined to do, make for happier people and perhaps more success in what you're choosing to do.
Yeah. And was there a deliberate approach from you to kind of concentrate on novel and fiction rather than doing, writing about biographies, or I don't know, become a writer and an author?
Yeah, it's a great question, because there are so many ways of writing. And what happened with my first novel is when I was in Palestine, I was staying in Ariha, which is Jericho, with my dad's family. And me and my husband went around with these notebooks, and we were just collecting all my family's stories. It was incredible. We learned so much from being there. So I ended up with a stack of notebooks of all these stories. And I looked at the literature that's out between the Palestinian and the Israeli conflict and the non-fiction. And a lot of my cousins in Palestine are journalists, and they're doing amazing jobs. And I just felt that for me, my medium was fiction. And that was because if you want to read about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there are many academic essays and books, but an audience that perhaps wouldn't pick those up may read fiction. And fiction has a particular structure where you can weave your stories into it. It can be optimistic, it can be realistic, but it can also sort of have a level of reality that you could almost want to create some hopefulness. And I wanted to use that because I really wanted to open up this world to a wide-ranging audience. And so for me, it was a natural transition to go to putting that into a fiction novel. And that's how I actually began my debut novel, Jasmine Falling.
Yeah, if you want to ask a question, you can do so now. And our lines are open, 01924 231 I've got a list of questions here. Yeah, we'll get through some of them throughout the programme. And then when you look at what's happening in Palestine, you obviously your family's from the West Bank, but what we saw in Gaza recently, how does that make you feel about the violence, the killing of children, just the suffering which has gone on for decades?
I mean, it's happening all over at the moment, and it's all over the world. And, you know, of course, you asked how it was during the last 18 months, and I think the inability to travel, to see family, to spend time with them, made it even more intense. You know, there's these stories coming out of Palestine. My cousins were recently imprisoned after the Gaza war, after the bombing on Gaza recently. And, you know, you think, what can you do? What can you do? When I was there last time, we were staying in a rural village just outside of Ramallah in one of my family's houses, and a young boy was shot at the border. And at the time, I couldn't believe, coming from the UK, not really understanding much about the occupation, how a young boy could be shot at the border and nothing can happen. There's no Palestinian police, there's no sort of earthly justice. It is an event that happens so often that it doesn't even make the news anymore, doesn't make media, and it happens almost on a weekly basis where children are shot on the border. And as I said when we opened the interview, I write furiously because I believe these quieter events that pass, they need to be told in a way that creates emotion. And that's why these stories run throughout my books. In the latest novel, The Land Beneath the Light, that explores that as well. Because when something like that happens, you feel that people should know what's happening. And also, for me personally, it's, as you said, what can you do? What can you do to affect change? And I think the beauty of being able to write and having a platform to share that writing is actually to humanize people behind the headlines. It's to take a look at something from a different perspective that maybe not be in the media.
Yeah, so you know, I'm just really reflecting on myself that when you see the media coverage, particularly Western media coverage, you're able to hear about the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers or Israelis who've been killed. Their names are used. But when you look at the Palestinian sides, generally, very rarely do you see the names of the Palestinian victims, and they're just seen as another number or statistic.
Yes, I mean, I've just been published in World Literature Today, which is a magazine that's published worldwide, and they've just done Palestinian stories. And one of the stories in there reflected on this and the use of sort of bodies by Sahar. Mustafa, I'll get her details. And, you know, it was that reflection on there being sort of no dignity. Now, with no names reported, there are news sites that you can follow. And as I said, my cousins are journalists there that do really fight to get a different narrative out there. But you know, that's why it particularly interests me to capture it in a more emotive way. So I use the vehicle of fiction to do that, because I really believe that to get behind the media stories, you need to feel and empathise with people to truly understand what's happening.
And when you talk to your family in the West Bank in particular, do you sense that they feel as if sort of Western media have dehumanized them and their story and their struggle and their history?
I mean, because they predominantly speak Arabic and there are lots of Arabic news content, I'm not sure how exactly they'd feel about it. But also another side to Palestine that people don't necessarily see, and it's something I explore in my books, there is life there. So, okay, they're living in incredibly tough circumstances, but, you know, there's life, there's hope, you know, people are getting married, they're having babies, they have a future ahead of them. And it's this sort of optimism and this hopefulness that I think we should also be focusing on, as well as the difficulties of life under occupation. There is also this other side that people don't see, and I'm particularly interested in exploring.
Yeah, and let's talk about that latest book. You, as I said in the intro, it's titled The Land Beneath the Light. Tell us more about the story and why you wanted to write it.
Okay, so The Land Beneath the Light is my third novel. I've done a migrant children's range as well, which also focuses on Palestine. But for The Land Beneath the Light, so it's just actually, we've just launched a cover reveal tonight, and it's a Palestinian reimagining of Jane Eyre. So the book summary, I'm going to read it for the listeners. From her rural farmhouse at the bottom of the hilltop, surrounded by the occupation, Khadija's life changes forever when the shadows descend, causing destruction in her village. In the wake of upheaval and ruin, Khadija draws upon her deeply rooted Palestinian heritage and stories to discover a life she has always dreamed of. A classic coming-of-age novel, The Land Beneath the Light explores the lived reality of those living under occupation in Palestine. So the story follows a young girl and her growth into adulthood. Now, what sort of was the push to write this was the village that I stayed at in my family's house, in the rural village. It's very hard to find them on satellites. You'll find that Palestinian towns and villages are being erased from the maps. And the idea that this village exists and my family's living there, and that's where the boy was shot at the border, doesn't even appear if you want to research it or look into it. And that really was sort of the catalyst for me beginning a novel to explore these sort of lesser known lives and villages in Palestine. And because I've stayed there, it really gave me a grounding to feel the setting as well. And it's quite common of Palestinian villages throughout the West Bank.
Yeah, really powerful story there. A couple of people on Facebook are saying, I don't look like a reader. I don't know what a reader looks like, but yeah, I love reading. And I think when I was a lot younger, Shereen, I used to read lots, because there wasn't mobile phones, there wasn't YouTube, I don't know, particularly when I was growing up. And so, you know, being able to kind of get yourself in books, read a book, I found fascinating. And up until about a year ago, I had loads of books until my wife told me to get rid of them. So yeah,
no.
that's a different story.
And how many of these books did you read? Did you feel had Muslim characters reflected in them?
So I read lots of biographies, lots of biography books and a lot of history books. But yeah, I would probably think, yeah, unless the author was Muslim or from a BME background, that might make a difference. Okay, we're going to pause there. It sounds like Shereen's interviewing me, putting me in the spotlight. But we'll return to normal service after the break. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq, exclusively here on British Muslim TV. Now on Facebook, there's a conversation going on about whether I, Mohammed Shafiq, reads books. I know, surprised. But anyway, David Noland, if you're still watching, yes, I do read. I read lots of books, and I might make the odd occasional grammatical error on my post, but hey, that's normal, isn't it? Anyway, if you want reading a book competition with me, David, we can certainly arrange that. Shahid Latif says, so let me say, he says, He says, Shereen, what an incredible lady you are. So proud of you. Stay strong, and let's all pray that we can achieve something better for Muslim suffering. And he says, I've never been into reading. It's very hard to discover your IQ. That's not what you wish. Anyway, but there's a sense of, when you look at, as you were talking to me, trying to sort of question me before the break, there's a sense of that representation not being there in terms of authors, the Turner Prize and all these award ceremonies that you see. In terms of gender equality, we've made the progress. But when it comes to BME, Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic authors, that representation isn't there just yet.
No, I mean, I think we have a very long way to go. And Britain is, very diverse. So just by including a few BME books isn't going to change the narrative. Now, when I did Jasmine Falling, it was published in 2015, so the landscape was even more different than it does now. And actually, that was a learning journey for me, because I came back from travelling. I submitted my books to British agents and publishers, and the reply was, we love it, but we don't understand your character. Could you change the character from being Palestinian? And we don't understand your audience, because the faith throughout the book was Islam. And that for me really sort of started my journey into Muslim representation, because I couldn't understand why books that I wrote for a wide audience, in a way to almost break down these barriers of how the West frames the East, to then be told that it's only sort of niche for Muslims, was actually a bit of a shock, because that wasn't why I wrote it. I wrote it for everybody, to understand these things in a different way. So I began to sort of research for Muslim Media Watch, and I don't know if the viewers will be surprised, but the representation of Muslim women across the media is very homogenous. It's almost as though there's one image of a Muslim woman, and what I was saying to myself is, we don't exist on the sidelines. The women that I've met, I mean, after we stayed in Palestine, my husband and I, we stayed living throughout the Middle East for 10 years. The Muslim women that I know, we don't exist as this one figure that's represented over and over again through worldwide media. So it's a huge issue. And if you look back at even Orientalism, this is how the West has framed the East, and there's a lot of work to do to actually erode those stereotypes.
Yeah, I promise you, we've got loads of questions around representation and some of the other works which we're going to cover in the sort of final segment after this one. But a real sense of, what was the reaction from your family when you did your first book? What did Mum say?
Well, it was the best book ever. So I knew that.
As mothers always say.
Exactly. Never give it to your mum to read for an honest opinion. No, they loved it. And actually, my mum spent a lot of time in Palestine when she was younger with my dad. And she said, I just felt transported back there. And it was almost a journey for all of us. And the support's been incredible, especially from my Palestinian family, because there are works in Arabic and my work is all in English. They really appreciate it. They really appreciate that you are telling stories about Palestine and trying to get, the narrative out there.
Yeah, in a way that people can understand and relate to, which I think you might possibly not get in a news item or a discussion than you would instead in a novel. And what about the children?
My children or my children's books?
Yeah, but the very idea that there's a book here with your name on it and it's been published, that must get them excited.
Yes, I mean, predominantly they were for grown-ups, but then I released The Girl Who Slept Under the Moon, and I've actually got my son's copy just here. He let me borrow it for this, which is very nice of him. They're my biggest critics, honestly. But the great thing is that, as I said when we opened the show, the reason I write is to capture a history that is being eroded incredibly quickly under occupation, a lot faster than it is in any other circumstance, like what we have in Palestine. And these stories are their stories. They're the stories of their heritage, of their grandparents, of their great-grandparents. And as we lose members of our family, their stories go, especially with a tradition of oral storytelling. So when I write my books, I write with them in mind, because it's their heritage, and I'm really interested in who's going to be writing that narrative and what they're going to inherit, because each time we return to Palestine, the country's changed. So there is an urgency about capturing that history for the younger generations.
Yeah, and then you look at, I suppose, out there, as I said, when you go into when you go into a bookshop, the sense of how do you find authors like yourself and your books, they're probably somewhere right at the back, aren't they? And that in itself is kind of part of the mission, because I don't know, when I reflect on Black Lives Matter and the brutal murder of George Floyd last year, and there was a kind of an outpouring of reflection. Do you think that in the writing field that happened as well?
I think it's filtering down, but it's a lot slower. And I think what we've got to remember is that publishing is an industry, and it's not completely without. I mean, you have 4 to 5 major publishers, so they publish 5 books a year. So you have a very limited scope there of works getting down. I mean, my novel, The Tower, Beacon Books completely understood what I was trying to do with The Tower. But the readers, as with Jasmine Falling, they're the ones who discovered it, the librarians, the school teachers, and they've actually sort of passed that down. And it's actually now being taught in colleges and schools. It's also set academic text at an American university. And this isn't from bookshops, this is from readers. This is from people who read the book and say, these are perspectives and these are issues that we need our children to be reading, our youth to be reading, our adults to be reading. And I think now that we have social media, we have platforms where a lot slower, but our voices can reach a different audience. And that should be really exciting for people who've got something different to say.
Yeah. And when you've also studied, as I said in the introduction, representation of Muslim women in the wider media. What sort of things did you discover as part of your research on that?
Well, I mean, it was actually really hard. It was non-fiction. So you had the element of it being news, and you had to have a look at the stories that were coming out, and you had to critique them in a way that would reveal any bias. And that actually wasn't a very difficult thing to do for a lot of the stories, which was very frustrating. And you get to hear a lot of things behind the scenes, such as, contracts that are offered to people outside of the Muslim community, where it's another editor working on a project, but or women who aren't getting a voice, or one particular image of a Muslim woman across the pages whenever there's a story about Muslim women. And what that does is that creates, as I said before, a very repetitive image, and it almost pushes Muslim women to the sidelines in the media. And that isn't really what I saw. It's not what I saw at all throughout the Middle East, throughout the UK. And it's a huge issue, and we have to ask ourselves why these narratives come out on top. Everyone in media has an agenda. Every publisher or books that are out that reinforce stereotypes, there is a bigger reason behind that. So I think just be aware when you're having a look at those things, and actively seek other types of work.
Yeah, and you've also, as well as being a novelist, you've written for some of the very important blogs and websites, including the Middle East Eye, but also you refer to the World Literature Today magazine, historic edition, I think, which is a really important moment, I think, for Palestinian for cause. Wow, what an achievement!
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
You did sort of the novel things, the fiction, but you also do really well on the non-fiction, if I may say so.
Yeah, I mean, I think with writing, when you find what it is you're passionate about, you become very invested in it. And that then impacts lots of different areas of your life. So now I do talk to people on Muslim representation. I will do the sort of more formal side of it, as well as doing my fiction novels, because, as I said, if you're very interested in a particular subject, then it will impact your life. And as I was in the Middle East, I have a perspective which crosses which I often say straddles the East and West. And it's very infuriating when you've seen such beauty, such empowerment from Islam, and then you see it completely misrepresented in the same old, very, very tired stereotypes and tropes. And, you know, it becomes frustrating and you want to break that. And that's why I add my books onto the bookshelf for a more refreshing, authentic perspective. And actually, a notable academic said that the Tower is how you write outside of Orientalism. And it's the truest way that we write about lived Muslim realities without pandering to stereotypes. So it shows that, you know, people do understand it and see it differently. But I think in order to write about something, you need to really understand it. And that's where my sort of non-fiction work really does impact my novels.
Yeah, that's really important. We're going to take our final break. Wow, I've just enjoyed our conversation. Just realized it was 9 o'clock when we started. It's already 9:41 here in the studio for our last segment with you, Shereen. But yeah, let's give you that update tonight on Afghanistan. The UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has been appearing in front of MPs at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He announced that whilst he hadn't spoken to the Pakistani and Afghan foreign ministers in the 6 months leading up to this crisis, he is tonight on its way to the region. He will travel to Pakistan and other countries in the region to try to find and formulate an international response to the Taliban now taking control of Afghanistan. And the Taliban have announced that they will be forming a government, which will be announced in the next few days, with their supreme leader being appointed as a spiritual leader, very much on the Iranian setup. But yeah, we'll keep an eye on that story as well. And when we come back after the break, we'll take some of your questions. The question we just got from WhatsApp, which says, how long did it take to get your first book published and what were the barriers? First, we'll take our final break, the final countdown to the end of the show. Join us on the other side of the Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Questions with me, Mohammed Shafiq. Do you know what I really love about this program? I love about British Muslim TV is that, and my guest, is they have such fascinating insight and stories that I get totally consumed by them and then realise that we're coming to the end of the program. And we're in the final segment. My special guest is Shereen Malherbe, who's a British Palestinian writer and novelist. And she's been really fascinating discussion with her. I mean, we had a question come in on WhatsApp, which was quite a few similar questions, so we'll group them together. One was, how long did it take you to get your first book published?
Well, my first book took about 4 years, if not longer, because in the end we took creative control and I independently published it because I wasn't willing to change any of the characters. Since then, on average now, probably 1 to 2 years now, I have a publisher. It's a lot quicker.
Yeah, and then the second question's around what sort of barriers did you encounter? I know you've gone through about the changing the narrative, but what other barriers have you faced in trying to get those books published?
I think a lot of it is your own barriers, your own expectations, your own sort of want for other people to say that your work's good enough. And sometimes I don't think you get that in writing. So I think just be confident in what you want to say, learn and study the technical aspects of writing and know when it's ready to get out there in the world yourself.
Yeah. There's a question here around your husband. I mean, it sounds like, listening to the conversation, he's been very supportive and a key part of your life and your successes. Tell us a bit about him and his involvement in supporting you.
Yes, he's always been very supportive. Even from my first book, it was actually my husband who said to me, okay, enough is enough. It's not going to be on your laptop anymore. We're going to publish this and we're going to put it out there in the world. So he was fundamentally key in actually publishing the first novel. And it was actually so great that we did get it out there because the response has been fantastic and actually led to my publishing contract. So absolutely very supportive and very hands-on actually with the first novel, or it may never have come out.
Well, we salute you, Mr. Husband, Mr. Shereen, as we might describe him. What tips can you give to aspiring writers who want to join the industry?
Be unique. There is stories that only you can tell. So find out what they are and what really drives your passion and write that. Don't try and copy market trends or try and write for other people. They're very long projects. So choose something that you're so passionate about that you'd write no matter what.
And then there's, well, I promise you we'll get through as many of these, but there is quite a few coming through. You love reading. What other recommendations do you have for our viewers, apart from your own books, obviously?
Just read widely. I don't like to ever, shorten what people read. Read widely, read short stories, read magazines, read world literature. My latest story is a retelling of Jane Eyre. That's very classic literature. So, just keep reading, and also non-fiction texts as well. I mean, everything that you read contributes to how you write.
Yeah. What would you say are your values that drive you and inspire you in your writing as well?
Well, I mean, if we go back to the reason that I did a Palestinian reimagining of Jane Eyre, when I was studying for my literature degree, we studied Austen, the Bronte sisters, as a discovery of Victorian Britain in the 19th century, and their books are steeped in Christian theology. And for me, when I write with books steeped in Islamic theology, it becomes pigeonholed to a smaller audience. But the success of these books isn't based on their theology. It's actually on what they're capturing. And I think removing that spiritual element, be it Christian theology or Muslim theology, which is what I write, these add to the essence of being human. So I keep spirituality in my books because I think it's a key part of being human and how characters make decisions. So for me, it would be the quieter voices that I'm interested in, and writing from an Islamic perspective.
And how is this question coming through on Twitter? How has the pandemic impacted you in terms of as being a writer? I know musicians obviously not been performing in stadiums and things like that. I mean, obviously, book writing, traveling, literature festivals, things like that. Has that sort of changed?
Yeah, I mean, we've just seen a huge shift online. So I wouldn't say that it did slow down for a period, but then it was very quickly picked up with online events, which was great because you could still give advice. It doesn't feel as social as it did going to events. It's always amazing meeting new writers and giving advice and doing book signings. But I think for writers especially, it may have been perhaps a little bit easier because the shift went online.
Yeah. And how do you see that changing now, or are we going to go to a hybrid sort of structure going forward?
Well, I mean, Stephen King himself said he couldn't sell out a stadium. Don't quote me on that. I just read it somewhere. But, I think that if you have an online presence, most of my book club meetings now are online. And actually, a lot of it is easier. Will there still be local events that I'd love to do? Yes, definitely. So I think it's probably, like you said, a mixture of the two.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to just get through some of these questions. I promise. We've got about 5-6 minutes left of the program. Tell us your latest book. When does that come out, and when can people expect to be able to purchase it?
Okay, well, you can pre-order it from today. So
oh wow! From today.
Yeah, we actually tied it in with this launch. So yes, it's
we love you.
Live on British Muslim TV first. So the cover reveal is now out. And you can actually pre-order the book now from either my website, ShereenMalherbe.com, or through the publishers Beacon Books. So you can pre-order it, and it will be out this winter, inshallah.
Yeah, this coming Wednesday, week today. And you don't actually get to see what the impact is instantly, do you? Or do you, in terms of how much books you sell? Or is that a wider timeline?
Yeah, it comes later. I mean, with the Tower, we'd done the launch. It had been sort of 6 months down the line, and my publisher received an email saying that it was set academic text at a university in America. Oh. Those are the kind of emails you don't really expect to get. And they come through at those times. So that's the great thing about it. I've just done a book club with a group of sisters who have just read Jasmine Falling, and all of that is new to them. So I think that is one of the great things about books. They don't have a sell-by date on, and the news from it can come at any time.
And there's one really powerful question I've got here from Ali. He talks about legacy. And he says, as an author, as a novelist, you might have your books that will live on long after you've gone from the world. What do you think, what sort of legacy do you want to leave the world?
Well, I mean, I think if again, I go back to what we look at now when we're studying literature, and we're looking at 19th century Victorian Britain, and they are fiction novels, yet we're studying them to have a snapshot of life in Britain at that time. And that's really what I'm trying to do with my novels. The Tower is UK based. My other books are based in Palestine. So what I would like is that snapshot captured in that moment exactly as we see it.
Yeah. And when you look at this industry and all the struggles that you've had and the barriers and the challenges you've faced in your career so far, what do you want the industry to now do to change for future women writers and Muslim writers?
Yeah, well, I think if you have something to say and you feel it's authentic, then stick to it. So many young writers, when approached by editors, say, you know, if you change this element of your book, then we'll publish it. And I think really knowing why you're writing and staying true to yourself and really questioning those decisions is absolutely key. I actually did pull one of my short stories from a major publisher because of the editing slant on it. So I think it's really, even though it's very difficult as an aspiring writer to have confidence, be really clear about what message it is you're trying to say, and just be really wary of the editing on that. And be confident. If you feel that you've got something to say and other people in the industry don't understand it yet, there are other platforms where you can publish. Yeah,
my final question. Lots of people really, I can't really go through all the messages tonight, really just praising you and singing your praise and just thanking you for coming on and everything you've done. What would you say to young girls watching this at home who might feel interested in getting involved in the industry?
Yes, I mean, you know, the future is with our youth, which is why, you know, I do books that are suitable for colleges as well. And if you want to write and you have things to say, then you're growing up in a generation where you can create your own following, you can create your own groups of readers. So learn your craft, learn the technical aspects of writing, read a lot, approach it with discipline, and get your work out there when you think it's ready.
Well, we look forward to welcoming you back to the programme. I'm sure you have an exciting new book launch. The book is titled The Land Beneath the Light and will be out next Wednesday. You can pre-order from today. Yeah. Thank you so much, Shereen. I really, really found it awesome tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. And best wishes to you and the family.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for inspiring us and really fascinating discussion there.